There has been a lot of discussion and criticism regarding President Trump's recent decision to allow an American tech company, NVIDIA, to sell their H200 AI chip to approved customers in China. Even some key Republicans are raising concerns and alarms. I heard that earlier with Congressman Davidson. And this goes against the decades of technology restrictions that helped America maintain its edge. Now, does the U.S. stand to lose more than it will gain from this? With me now in studio to discuss this, Josh Hodges, a commissioner on the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. He is also a former national security advisor to U.S. House Representative Mike Johnson and former special assistant to the president on the National Security Council. Josh, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us here in studio.
Thanks for having me on.
So we actually planned on having you on yesterday, but Senator Pete Ricketts, who's a frequent guest on the show, had a measure introducing that he was introducing regarding this, and you had to provide him some insight on this. So let's talk about this. Why is this? Why are people upset about this?
Yeah, well, sir, you nailed it on the head. First, this does sort of raise the question of what is the United States doing in the long term to halt China's rapid growth and advancement on the technology front, and then how's China using that technology? And so part of the reason lots of folks are upset about this is they feel like this didn't receive adequate sort of policy discussion that it should have received, and that typically these types of decisions do receive. And frankly, it comes down to the fact that folks believe the president is getting bad information from an American company that is pursuing the bottom line over America's national security in the long term.
There was a provision that was going to be in the NDAA.
That is right.
That was held out.
Yes, sir.
That would have prohibited this.
That's right. It was included in the Senate NDAA, the Gaines Act, and it would have a provision that would have just prioritized American companies getting access to these chips before they could be sold overseas.
So let's talk about the practical implications. And we're not talking about chips that are going to be used in Game Boys. I mean, these are chips that basically, and I know you know more than just about the economic aspects when it comes to China. Anything we deal with China regarding, we have to assume that it is somehow going to the military.
We don't just assume it, we know it. And this not only saves the Chinese money, time, and effort that they otherwise would be having to divert their resources towards. We're giving them tools now that they can just immediately plug in that have military applications, and that is going to enable military capabilities to be better connected.
Now, these are not the top chips. I think it's the Blackwell.
Yes, sir.
Those are the really elite.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
That are being held back. But by allowing these H200, what we're allowing is them to, as you said, divert resources that they would have to have put on these lower level chips.
That's right. And it's again, there's this misnomer that because they're not the absolute best, it really doesn't matter. They're still 5 times better than the other chips that previously would have been provided to them, and much better, years more advanced than what the CCP has access to right now. Some estimates say that the earliest they would have gotten this capability would have been 2027.
So give us some idea of the applications.
Yeah, so we know that the Chinese are using some of this technology. The immediate applications is they will take this, they will build their own stack. So there is the economic competition part. There's the argument made that by allowing these chips to go forward, we're going to make them dependent on the United States. That's never been proven. That model's been tried before.
Let me do. Let's go back to the most favored nation status.
Yes, sir.
In the 1990s that Bill Clinton advocated for China, where we brought them in saying that our trade with them is going to change them in the way they conduct business, their human rights. Did that prove to be true?
The historical record shows it did not, and it has never been proven right on any technology that we've provided to China, and I don't think it's going to be the case here either.
I would argue actually the opposite, that it's changed America more than it has changed China, that our dealings with them economically has actually seduced more American businesses even to go down this trail of providing technology that is being used against us and our allies.
Absolutely. And in addition to American companies, it also sends a message to our allies who we've asked not to sell equipment to the Chinese related to this type of technology, to build this type of technology to the Chinese, those allies are now going to be asking the question, so if you can sell the chips directly, why can't I sell manufacturing equipment to make this type of technology? So the first application is on the chips. It's going to enable them to be able to replicate it faster, because we know they'll find a way to steal that IP. They'll find a way to go back and be able to produce those chips at a much faster rate than they would have had they just been devoting their own resources to it. In addition to that, these are high-end capability chips that have higher memory, and so they're going to have military applications if they're plugged into those military tech, the missiles, the AI systems that are being used that the CCP wants to deploy right now to make their military more interoperable. That is something they have said they plan to do, and they're going to use these chips to do that.
And they are expanding their military rapidly.
Absolutely, yes. At 20 times the speed the United States is.
Let's talk about human rights, okay?
Yes,
It's when I was chair of the USERF Commission, very concerned about their repressive tactics against religious minorities and their use of technology. I mean, they now are tracking their citizens, and they're using this. They're using it in the churches there. In fact, some of the recent arrest of these pastors took place because they would not allow the surveillance in their churches. So they're using this technology to repress their people, to track their people. They're perfecting that technology and then exporting it. A lot of that technology came from the United States.
They are certainly building on the backs of American capabilities and American technology. That is absolutely true. DeepSeek, everyone in D.C. and across the U.S. sort of said, oh, this is a wake-up call. The Chinese have caught up to us. That was built on the back of American capabilities. And so you're absolutely right. They are exporting this to repressive regimes, whether it's in Venezuela and South America, or helping Russia in the war against Ukraine. It is now an established, well-understood fact that the Chinese have their tech exports have largely helped a lot of these conflicts. There's a public reporting from last year talking about how the Chinese may have potentially helped ahead of sort of the October 7th attacks in 2023. And so, and again, it's varying degrees, but they are clearly behind a lot of the destabilization that's occurred in the last 2 years. A lot of the fires that President Trump inherited when he came into office, the Chinese are behind the scenes on most of it.
So I want to go back to one of your original statements here that the president was getting some bad advice on this. Where's that advice coming from?
It's largely coming from one company related to this issue. And that company is, as I said before, they're prioritizing their bottom line for their shareholders over the national security interests.
So is it a part of, I mean, I've dealt with President Trump quite extensively in his first administration.
Yes, sir.
But business is his lane.
Yes, sir.
And I think that he's enamored by business people, successful business folks. And unfortunately, I think he leans too much into what they have to say as opposed to some of those. He doesn't always have the respect, I think, of he doesn't respect the views of some of those experts on many of these issues.
I was talking to a general recently, and the way he phrased this is, he's a thousandaire, not a billionaire. And so I think the general speaking for himself, and he said it's often hard to get your point across when you're talking about a technology where this company is supposed to know the ins and outs of all of it. But the reality here is this company views the market in China as a honeypot, a golden pot that they need access to, and they want access to, and so they want to make as much money for their shareholders as possible. And unfortunately, the thing that I've seen play out in the last few months is, as this policy discussion has moved, is other smaller companies don't want to go out against NVIDIA and others. They don't want to reach out to the White House because they don't want to be seen at odds with something the president may like, and so they're withholding valuable input that the White House really needs to receive. So I've been advocating to a lot of companies in the U.S. If you have demand for these, and you've told me that you do, and you've publicly stated that you do have a demand for it, speak up. Reach out to the White House about that.
So why are they afraid to speak out?
A lot of them rely on these NVIDIA chips.
There's also, I see some things changing a little bit on Capitol Hill over this issue. There's been a couple of others, but there's some bipartisan opposition here.
Yes, sir.
I
Yes,
mean,
sir.
there are Republicans that are speaking out.
And there's on that note as well. There's an effort to just point this out as like, oh, this is just an extreme sort of hawk view, and that's not the case at all. This is based on common sense. It's based on the historical record, as you pointed out, on an issue that down the road is going to potentially cost men and women in uniform their lives if we get this wrong. And that's what's so important. That's why there is the bipartisanship on it.
So Josh, you may have seen this. I think it was week before last. House Speaker Mike Johnson and his wife Kelly were doing an interview, and he was asked the question, what keeps you up at night? And he said, China and AI. Now, I don't know if the comment were the two combined, but here in this case, the two are combined.
Yes, sir.
Does it keep you up at night?
Absolutely. As you know, I was his national security advisor for about 1 year and 8 months, and it is absolutely something that kept me up at night at the time. It still keeps me up at night, not just in the sense of what AI is capable of doing here domestically, and I do think that is a concern, but how our adversaries are planning to use AI against the American people at a social level, at an economic level, and on warfare. All three of those domains, the Chinese have active plans ongoing right now to use it against our way of life.
Do you think that American policymakers are discounting the threat of China?
I do. I believe it's an area where, despite the amount of attention it's gotten over the last 10, 15 years, and this really did change. President Trump deserves a lot of credit because he really put the spotlight back on this issue, particularly with regard to the Western Hemisphere and internationally. But despite the attention it's gotten, they are still more aggressive and more active than most Americans think.
My take is, and I track this more than most,
Yes, sir.
is that it's stealth.
Right.
They're not like Vladimir Putin that's out there pounding his chest or riding a horse bareback. The reality is that they're doing this very quietly but systematically, and they have a plan and they're working the plan.
Absolutely. And so the U.S.-China Commission just came out with our annual report, and the overarching finding that we have is there is an aggressive multi-tiered campaign against the United States internationally and within the United States to do exactly what you're talking about: quietly subvert what we have underway, but also to embed themselves so they have these choke points, so they can turn off our energy grid if they need to, so that they can turn off our pharmaceutical supply chain, so they can turn off rare
Which we
earth
saw in
minerals.
COVID.
We saw that exactly, and a lot of people have forgotten that piece of it. The majority of American pharmaceuticals come from China. There's a progress underway right now to sort of work with India more. Unfortunately, the thing that our report highlights is that India is getting a lot of those from China and then selling them to us. So this is a critical issue. The Chinese have an active plan across the board, whether it's batteries, whether it's EVs, whether it's solar panels, telecommunications equipment, and sort of magnets even, and they have active measures underway to increase their ability to turn off these choke points, and they've proven they're willing to do it.
And having access to these advanced chips will only enable that effort.
Only make it go faster. It'll only put us more at risk. And so on that, there is, my hope is that the 200s are moving forward. The president has made that decision. That is the policy decision to make, that as that happens, there are still mechanisms that can be put in place to monitor that. So NVIDIA has talked about the fact that they have the technology to monitor where these go. All it requires is adding components to the chip so we can better facilitate and track that. That needs to be done. That should be part of this conversation as it moves forward. And my hope is that that actually comes to fruition.
Well, we certainly can't trust China, to be honest, about anything.
And that's what we can't forget.
Josh Hodges, I want to thank you for coming in today. Appreciate the insight and the good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the time. Great to be here.